The handsaw's teeth catch on bone with a sickening rhythmic scrape. Christopher May's hands won't stop trembling. The metallic smell of blood hangs thick in the stale air of his small apartment. At his feet lies Tracey Woodford, her life ended in a blur of drunken rage. His mind spins with two impossible paths: admit what he has done and face the police, or reach for the handsaw and kitchen knives from his old butcher days and make every trace of her vanish. In the silence broken only by his ragged breathing, he chooses the path of a monster. On this channel, stories are told in a fully cinematic, audio-first way, so you never have to look at the screen to feel every moment. You are listening to Minutes of Fear, where every story leaves something behind. Let's ease into this one slowly. Close your eyes and feel the rhythm of an ordinary life in the Welsh valleys. Tracey Woodford was a 47-year-old woman with a kind heart and a gentle spirit. She lived quietly with her mother Linda and her brother Sean, finding contentment in shared meals, cups of tea in the kitchen, and the warmth of family bonds. Her days were simple, free from drama or excess. On the 21st of April 2015, Tracey stepped out for what felt like a normal day. She headed into the town centre of Pontypridd and bought herself a ring, a small pleasure that lifted her mood. As the afternoon stretched on, though, an unusual restlessness stirred inside her. Tracey rarely drank. Alcohol hit her hard and fast, but something pushed her to stop at a few pubs and bars. You can hear the hesitation in her voice as bartenders noticed her growing unsteadiness. She was refused service at one point because she looked too shaky. Yet she continued, the world softening around the edges. By 7:45 in the evening, she pushed open the door to the Skinny Dog pub, a local haunt buzzing with voices and laughter. Inside, she felt exposed, nervous, her usual quiet demeanor making her stand out. That is where their paths crossed. 50-year-old Christopher May, a regular there, known among friends as a joker and a decent guy. He and his mates were holding court. Tracey found herself drawn into their conversation. As drinks flowed, her nerves eased. She laughed more, perked up, and before long there was flirting. Christopher offered to keep the drinks coming if she went home with him. Tracey pushed back, saying she was not that kind of woman. But the night wore on. Around 11:30, CCTV captured them walking side by side toward his apartment, the cool night air on their faces. Tracey had no idea what kind of man she was really with. Christopher had noticed her fragile state immediately, and in the darkest corners of his mind, he saw an opportunity. What thoughts were racing through his head as they approached his door? What was it about this gentle woman that triggered something so evil? That is where the night took its horrifying turn. The door closed, and the real story began. The lock clicked shut like a trap snapping into place. Inside Christopher May's small flat, the world narrowed to 4 walls, and the sound of 2 people breathing. Tracey Woodford stood just inside the doorway, the alcohol still humming in her veins, making the floor feel unsteady beneath her shoes. The room smelled of stale smoke and yesterday's food, but she told herself it was fine. Just one more drink, then she would call a taxi. That was the plan. Christopher moved around her like he owned every inch of the space. "Sit down, love. Let me get you something proper." His voice was still the easy joker from the pub, but something underneath it had shifted. She lowered herself onto the edge of the couch, clutching her handbag like a shield. The lamp cast long shadows across the carpet. Her heart tapped a little quicker now that the door was closed and the outside world was gone. He handed her another glass. Ice cubes clinked. She took a sip to be polite, the liquid burning all the way down. They talked, or tried to. She laughed at one of his stories, but the laugh came out too high, too thin. He kept leaning closer. "You're safe here," he said, but his eyes had already decided she was not. In his head the thoughts moved fast and dark. She is small. She is drunk. No one knows she is here. Tracey felt it before she could name it, that cold prickle at the back of her neck. She set the glass down. "I should probably head home. My mum will worry." She stood. The room swayed. Christopher stood too, blocking the short path to the door. "Come on now, don't be like that. You came all this way." His tone had lost its smile. The air in the flat grew heavier, harder to breathe. She tried to step around him. His hand shot out, fingers wrapping around her wrist. Not hard yet, but tight enough that her pulse jumped against his skin. "Let go," she whispered. He did not. The joking mask slipped completely. What happened next was fast and ugly. A blur of raised voices, her trying to pull free, his grip turning to steel. The struggle was short. A chair toppled. A lamp rocked. Then came the sound, the one the neighbors below would hear 3 hours after she had last been seen on camera. A heavy, final thud that shook the ceiling like someone had dropped a sack of wet cement. Then, nothing. Only the sound of one person breathing hard in the dark. Christopher May stood over Tracey Woodford's body, chest heaving, sweat running into his eyes. The room spun around him. This was not supposed to happen. He had only wanted a bit of fun. Now she was not moving. He dropped to his knees, vomit rising in his throat as the first wave of sobriety crashed over him. His hands, the same hands that had once carved through ribs and shoulders at the butcher shop, shook violently. He touched her neck. No pulse. Just warm skin cooling under his fingers. He sat back on his heels in the silence that followed, staring at what he had done. The flat felt smaller than ever, the walls closing in like they knew his secret. Outside, the town of Pontypridd slept on, completely unaware that a gentle woman who only wanted to buy a ring and spend time with her family would never walk through her mother's door again. But Christopher's mind was already racing ahead, calculating, planning, refusing to accept that this was the end. Because if the body stayed here, everything ended. And he was not ready for everything to end. He knelt there in the dark, the only sound his own ragged breathing and the slow drip of something wet hitting the carpet. Tracey Woodford lay completely still at his feet. Christopher May's mind fractured right then, splitting between the man who had laughed at the skinny dog and the stranger now staring at what he had broken. His stomach lurched again. He vomited into the corner until nothing was left, wiping his mouth with the back of a shaking hand. This is not real. This cannot be my life. But the weight of her body told him otherwise. If she stayed here whole, everything ended. So the butcher in him woke up. He stood, legs like lead, walked to the kitchen drawer and pulled it open with a long metallic scrape that seemed to echo forever. His fingers closed around the handsaw first, then the heavy kitchen knife, then the scissors. Tools he had used for years, cutting through ribs, legs, shoulders at the shop. Muscle memory took over where his soul had already left the room. He dragged her into the tiny bathroom. The tiles felt ice cold under his knees. He laid her out carefully, almost gently, like he was still pretending this was a job. The shower curtain rings jingled as he shoved it aside. Then he began. The first bite of the saw teeth into her shoulder made a sound that would live behind his eyes forever. A wet, gritty rasp, like ripping through thick gristle soaked in rain. Back and forth, back and forth. His arms burned, sweat poured into his eyes, but he did not stop. The arm came free with a final pop and a heavy thud against the tub. He set it aside. Then the other. The legs were harder. Bone fought him. The saw screamed louder. Blood ran across the floor in slow, glossy rivers, filling the air with that thick copper smell mixed with the cat piss that already lived in the flat. He gagged again, but kept the rhythm. Cut. Separate. Stack. Hours bled away. At some point he sat back against the wall, chest heaving, covered in her and in himself, whispering over and over, "I have to finish. I have to finish." His hands, steady now with that old butcher calm, moved on their own, the scissors for the smaller pieces. Fingers, the pieces that would not fit neatly. He worked until the body was no longer a person, just parts that could be hidden. The upper torso went into the old Adidas rucksack he kept by the door. He zipped it tight, the sound final and heavy. Arms and legs disappeared behind the shower curtain, arranged like forgotten groceries. Smaller remains tucked into her own handbag. And the head. He stared at it longest, wrapped it separately, set it aside for the next trip. By the time grey light leaked through the curtains, the flat smelled of death and bleach and fear. Christopher stood in the middle of it all, breathing hard through his mouth, looking at the rucksack leaning against the wall like it was just laundry. He had turned a gentle woman who only wanted to buy a ring into something that fit inside a bag. He showered quickly, changed into fresh clothes, and stared at his reflection. Scratches on his face stared back. He would say it was a pole from the hardware store. Simple. Believable. Then he picked up the rucksack, slung it onto his back, and felt the weight settle between his shoulder blades. He opened the front door. Morning air hit his face. People were already walking to work, cars passing, life moving on like nothing had changed. Christopher May stepped outside carrying what was left of Tracey Woodford and walked into the daylight like any other man. The front door clicked shut behind him with the soft finality of a coffin lid. Christopher May stepped into the weak morning light of the 22nd of April 2015, the Adidas rucksack heavy between his shoulder blades. Inside it, wrapped tight in plastic, and then again in a red bag, rested Tracey Woodford's head. The weight shifted with every step, rolling slightly like something alive trying to settle. He told himself it was just the bag settling, nothing more. His legs felt detached from his body, moving on autopilot down the familiar pavement while his mind screamed in a loop. Do not run. Do not look back. Act normal. Pontypridd was waking up around him. Mothers pushed prams past. Shopkeepers rolled up shutters with metallic rattles. A bus hissed to a stop and spilled out commuters who brushed within inches of the secret on his back. One man even nodded at Christopher like they were old mates. "All right, mate?" Christopher forced a grin, the scratches on his face stinging under the smile. "Yeah, fine. Hardware store pole caught me yesterday." The lie came out smooth. The rucksack strap dug into his shoulder, and for one horrifying second he swore he felt the weight inside twitch. He kept walking, breath shallow, eyes fixed on the cracked pavement ahead. He reached the storm drain on the edge of town, the dark mouth of the tunnel half hidden by overgrown weeds. No one around. He glanced left, right, then dropped down into the concrete channel. The air turned cold and damp. His shoes splashed in shallow water. He set the rucksack on a narrow ledge, unzipped it with trembling fingers, and pulled out the red bag. The head rolled out when he loosened the plastic, landing on its side with a soft, wet sound. Bruised face staring up at nothing, hair matted, eyes half open like she was still trying to understand what had happened. He shoved everything deeper into the shadows, heart hammering so loud he was sure the whole town could hear it. Then he climbed back out, empty-handed now, and walked away like he had just taken out the bins. By the time he reached the restaurant for his shift, the scratches on his face were already crusting over. The manager asked, "What the hell happened to you?" Christopher shrugged, voice steady. "Pole from the hardware store. Stupid accident." They believed him. Of course they did. He chopped vegetables with the same hands that had used a saw hours earlier, the rhythm almost comforting. But inside, the exhaustion clawed at him. A neighbor had seen him earlier, shuffling like a dead man walking. She would remember that drained look later. Meanwhile, back in Tracey's quiet home, the worry had already begun to bloom. Linda Woodford checked the clock again and again. No call, no text. Her daughter never stayed out like this. She rang Sharon. She rang friends. Nothing. By afternoon, the messages were frantic. By evening, the police were involved. Pieces started sliding together fast. The pubs, the skinny dog, the man she left with. 3 days later, on the 24th of April, Sergeant Stuart Williams and Constable Craig Gardner stood outside Christopher's door. They knocked. No answer at first. They knocked harder. When he finally opened it, his face was pale, eyes darting. The officers stepped inside. The smell hit them like a wall, thick, sweet, rotten meat, mixed with something sharper, like cat urine left to fester. Christopher shifted from foot to foot. "She left after I made a rude joke," he said. "Walked out. Never saw her again." The officers did not believe him. They asked to look around. He shrugged, too tired to fight it. They moved deeper into the flat. The stench grew stronger with every step. They reached the bathroom door. One officer's hand closed around the edge of the shower curtain. The shower curtain rings screamed along the metal rod like tiny metal teeth grinding together. Constable Craig Gardner's fingers froze mid-pull. The smell that had been bad became unbearable, a thick wave of rotten meat and something sharper, like old pennies left to rust in piss. He yanked the curtain the rest of the way. There they were. Tracey Woodford's arms and legs, pale and heavy, stacked like butcher's cuts behind the white plastic. One arm bent at an unnatural angle, fingers curled as if still reaching for help. The legs severed clean at the hips, skin mottled purple where blood had settled. Water from the tap dripped steadily onto the pile, plink, 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 mixing with dark residue that swirled down the drain in lazy spirals. Gardner's stomach flipped. He staggered back a step, the heel of his boot slipping in something slick on the tiles. "Jesus Christ," he breathed, voice cracking like a teenager's. For one long second he thought his eyes were lying, that he had walked into the middle of a horror film. Someone had paused on the worst frame. Sergeant Stuart Williams stepped up beside him, flashlight beam trembling across the horror. Neither man spoke. The only sound was Christopher May's shallow breathing from the hallway behind them, quick and wet, like an animal caught in a snare. Christopher stood there in his own flat, hands hanging loose at his sides, scratches still raw on his face. He did not run. He did not scream. He just watched them see what he had done. The butcher's calm he had forced on himself all morning finally cracked. His knees buckled. He dropped to the carpet, whispering, "I did not mean for it to go this far." The flat filled with radio chatter and the heavy boots of more officers. Forensics arrived in white suits that rustled like dry leaves. They photographed everything. The handsaw still flecked with bits of bone on the kitchen counter, the kitchen knife with its blade darkened, the scissors lying open like hungry jaws. They found the Adidas rucksack leaning against the wall, zipper half open. Inside, the upper torso waited, carefully wrapped. Tracey's own handbag sat nearby, smaller pieces tucked inside like gruesome souvenirs. Christopher was cuffed and led out into the daylight he had walked through earlier with her head on his back. Neighbors gathered at windows. Phones came out. Word raced through Pontypridd faster than any siren. But the worst was still hidden. Later that same day, under grey skies, officers followed his broken confession to the storm drain on the edge of town. Flashlights cut through the black tunnel. Water echoed off concrete walls. One officer's beam landed on a ledge halfway down. A red bag. Then, just to the right of it, something pale and round lying on its side. Tracey Woodford's head, bruised, swollen, hair plastered with mud and worse. Her eyes stared straight into the flashlight like she was still trying to ask why. The officer's voice came out small in the dark. "We have the head." Back at the station, Christopher sat under harsh lights, face blank, and began to spin his story. Self-defense, blackout rage, how he had been sick afterward, how none of it felt real. But the laptop in his flat told a different truth. Hours of adult content watched after her last breath. DNA in places no accident could explain. Internal organs flushed down his own toilet until the pipes clogged. The gentle woman who only wanted to buy a ring and go home to her mother had been reduced to pieces a man could carry in a rucksack through morning traffic. And still, most of her was still missing. The heavy wooden doors of the Cardiff Crown courtroom swung shut with a deep, echoing thud that seemed to seal the air itself. It was the 19th of November, 2015. 2 long weeks of testimony had dragged every dark detail into the light. Christopher May sat motionless in the dock, hands folded, face carved from stone. No flicker, no remorse, just empty eyes staring at a future he had already tried to saw away. Constable Craig Gardner stepped into the witness box, the same officer who had pulled back that shower curtain. His uniform was pressed sharp, but his voice trembled the moment he spoke. "I thought my eyes were deceiving me," he said, throat closing. "I thought I was watching some sort of horror movie." The grown man broke right there on the stand, shoulders shaking, tears cutting tracks down his face. The courtroom held its breath. You could hear the faint rustle of tissues, the creak of benches, the quiet horror settling over everyone who now saw the scene exactly as he had. The pathologist followed. His words landed like scalpels. The dismemberment was carried out with clear experience. Someone skilled with knives, removing meat from ribs, legs, shoulders. This was not the work of a panicked amateur. Everyone in that room looked at Christopher, the butcher, the man whose old trade had become his weapon. The prosecution painted the final picture in cold, relentless strokes. Not self-defense, not a blackout. Christopher's laptop told the truth. Hours of adult content streaming long after Tracey's final breath. His DNA left on her body in places no accident could explain. He played out his depraved fantasies on an innocent woman, they said. Then he tried to flush her away like waste. Most of her internal organs were still missing. Some had clogged his own toilet in his desperate attempt to erase her completely. The defense tried one last time. Christopher insisted she had gone through his wallet. Rage took him. He strangled her in a drunken fit, sobered up sick, horrified, then cut her apart because the panic left him no choice. Everything felt unreal, he claimed. But the jury had already seen the rucksack, the storm drain, the tools, the head. They returned. Guilty. Christopher May did not move, not a twitch, not a sound. The judge's voice filled the silence. Life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 28 years. Outside on the cold steps, the Woodford family stood broken under the grey Welsh sky. Tracey's mother Linda could barely speak through the tears. "It feels like we are living in a nightmare," she said, voice cracking. "He has torn my family apart. He has destroyed us totally." Her son Sean, Tracey's brother, stared at nothing, jaw tight. "I am angry every day now. I struggle to sleep most nights." Pontypridd tried to go back to normal, but something had changed forever. The gentle woman who only wanted to buy a ring and go home to tea with her family had been reduced to pieces carried through morning streets in a rucksack. And the butcher who did it would sit behind bars for the rest of his life. Yet the missing parts of Tracey were never found, and the fear she left behind, that never left at all.